I have come here to chew bubblegum and talk about radial arm saws. And I'm all out of bubblegum. Hi, welcome to my shop. Come on in. If you're new here, my name is Dan, and if you're not, you already knew that. Over the decades, radial arm saws have picked up a reputation for being dangerous that has risen to almost mythological proportions. And that level of fear is completely unwarranted with these. Now, I am going to explain that, but before I do, I want to let you know that you need to stay to the end of the video because I am going to try and induce both an uncontrolled climbing cut with this, cross cut, and a ripping kickback. Now, that is either going to be a complete catastrophe or an absolute nothing burger. And I haven't done it yet as of filming this, so I don't know which it's going to be. Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. What's going to happen? Will there be blood? We'll find out. I've wanted to get a radial arm saw for a while, mostly out of nostalgia. My dad, like virtually every other suburban dad in the 60s and 70s, had this as his saw in our basement. That's just what you owned. And his was a Craftsman, a little bit older model than this, because I think every tool he owned was a Craftsman. But I really didn't have space for it. And then my table saw was out of commission for a little while, which is an entirely different saga. There might be clips on my YouTube channel about that. Anyway, so I was making some space in the basement, and these things are super cheap on Marketplace, like under 50 bucks, often for free. So I was like, you know what, I'll get one. That way I'll have a backup saw to use just in case my table saw ever goes out of commission again. And I have the nostalgia factor as well. And I noticed there's a distinct lack of radial arm saw material videos on YouTube. It's just something that's not covered a lot. The two that most people are probably familiar with are Stumpy Nubs videos about the ridiculously dangerous procedures that are in some of the older manuals. And the one by an older gentleman named Big Mac Tuna, I think. It's called the Radial Arm Saw, Better and Safer Than a Table Saw. That's kind of most of the opinions that you get are either people that are wildly in love with table saws or absolutely hate them. I mean, you go online and most of what you're going to find are either fanboys saying that this is God's gift to woodworking, just as safe as a downy pillow, and you should throw away every other power saw you have and just get one of these. And the other side is the fearmongers who tell you that if you even look at this thing the wrong way, even if it's not plugged in, it'll lop your hand right off. The truth, as usually is the case, is somewhere in between these. I've often seen comments, something to the effect of, the radial arm saw is unforgiving if you get careless with it, which is absolutely true. But you know what else is unforgiving? A miter saw, a jointer, a bandsaw. These things were literally invented to cut through flesh and bone in meat processing plants. A chainsaw, a table saw. These things are responsible for more injuries in the modern workshop than every other tool collectively, even the humble drill press. The truth is, any tool with a beefy motor and a sharp spinny thing on it can fuck up your life in a heartbeat. Don't treat it with the respect that it's due. So are these dangerous? Well, of course they are. But just like any other tool in your shop, if you keep it properly tuned and adjusted, learn how to use it correctly, it is just as safe as every other tool in your shop as well. There are some risks specific to a radial arm saw, but that doesn't make it different from any other tool. A hydraulic press can maim you or kill you just as easily as this thing can, but in very different ways. That's why it's very important to understand how you can get hurt using a tool, and that will inform you about how to avoid getting hurt. And there are three major things that are inherent to a radial arm saw that don't necessarily apply to other saws. One of them is incidental blade contact. Now, that can happen with a circular saw. There's a bit more of a risk with a radial arm saw, and I'll get to that. The other one is an uncontrolled climb cut, and I'll explain what that is, and I'll show you about that in a minute too. And then, of course, there's kickback or ejection during a rip cut, which is also a danger that's present with a table saw. So one of the criticisms against the radial arm saw that I think is completely fair is that the factory blade guards often don't cover much more than half of the total blade. And that makes incidental contact with the blade much more of a risk. These blades take a while to spin down. This model doesn't have a blade brake on it. Most of the older saws like this, or even old table saws, don't have blade brakes on them. So they'll be a while spinning down, and it's easy to just brush your fingers against that. So what I did is I made this additional blade guard for myself. It helps protect against that. I might try and make one on the inner part too, but that's a lot more difficult with this. But the whole motor is in here, so it's much harder to actually get your hand in contact from the motor side anyway. But they have secondary market blade guards. You can buy aftermarket ones, or just make yourself one like I did this. It was super easy. I didn't have any plans or anything, although I shared some plans on Facebook for this one that I designed. And it took me maybe an hour total to get this finished. I had to iterate the shade a few times so it would move smoothly as the material passed underneath it. Yes, the saw is unplugged right now, so don't worry, I'm not sticking my hand near a potentially deadly thing. So fair criticism, but one that's easily mitigated and worth taking the time to do. This is a cheap solution. These things, it's like 20 bucks of plastic off Amazon. So do it. Do it. If you've got a radial arm saw, make an extra blade guard for yourself. It's not hard. I can do it. Anybody can do it. Uncontrolled climbing cuts is the second big danger with a radial arm saw. And if you look at it, so the blade turns this way, which is pulling your workpiece into the fence and pushing it down onto the table, which is great. But it also means as you start to move the saw through the cut, it wants to move this way. It'll try and move this way on its own, and you have to resist that forward motion a little bit. The danger is that it will climb up over the workpiece and jump towards you. I've heard some weird things people have said about this. Like someone said they were worried that this thing would shoot so fast, so far forward, so fast that it was going to blow out the end of the saw and, I don't know, land with a spinning saw blade in their lap. That's utter nonsense, honestly, and it's just not something to be afraid of. The big danger, well, aside from destroying your workpiece, the big danger with an uncontrolled climbing cut is if you have your hand anywhere near the blade. It's going to jump and cut through your hand. But why the hell is your hand there in the first place? You should be holding your hand out here. Now, I could see that if the blade jumped forward, you might twist and your hand might move that way. Well, you know what? That's easy to get around too. Just clamp this damn thing in place and don't even have your other hand on the table. This is why I talk about knowing how a tool can hurt you and knowing how to avoid it. So yeah, a climbing cut could possibly twist my hand over. I have a blade guard on here, so it would probably be safe, although I suppose it could get jerked into the path of the blade. But knowing that that's a risk, I can just clamp my workpiece down. And I even got, this is a new table I just made for the saw. So I haven't put the dog holes in it, but I just got these bench dog clamps. You drop it down in a hole, you screw this down, holds the workpiece nice and secure, holds it down in place, and it's great. And if you're really, really having a hard time getting control of that, you can actually saw this way. That is the motion of a sliding miter saw. You come out, you come down, and you push forward with the miter saw. This thing will cut perfectly safely in that direction. You won't have to worry about the climb out any more than you would with a sliding miter saw. It just limits kind of how big of a piece, because you need to start the blade off. You can't start the blade in a workpiece. Never ever do that with any saw. That's asking for trouble. So it might limit your size a little bit, but honestly, I don't think the climb, it feels a little different when you first pull it through. But the first time anybody uses any tool, it's going to feel a little different. It's going to feel a little weird. So again, this comes down to knowing your tool, knowing how it works, how it's dangerous, learning the safety procedures, and just using it safely. Last, and of course not least, is the dreaded rip cut kickback that everyone is just terrified of. I mean, I've seen people online saying you should never, ever rip cut with a radial arm saw. And frankly, I think that's tosh. If you've got everything adjusted and aligned properly, which, by the way, let me add this in right now, is more of a challenge with a radial arm saw than with a table saw. A table saw does one thing, and it does it very well, but it makes straight cuts along the length of the table, and that's all it does. The only real adjustments you need to worry about is the pitch of the blade and whether or not it's square to your fence. That's it. This thing has a bunch of moving parts on it. It can rotate this way, it can bevel this way, the arm miters, it goes up and down. So there's a lot more things you need to adjust to get it square. That can be a challenge for a newer woodworker. You know what? I admit that. That makes this a little bit more to get tuned into proper shape, but it certainly can be done. But if you understand how to rip on a radial arm saw, frankly, I think it's perfectly safe, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more. But one of the other things I've heard is about people feeding the wood in the wrong direction based on the blade rotation. They're feeding it in with the blade rotation instead of against the blade rotation. But in every saw with a circular cutting blade, you feed the wood in against the rotation of the saw. That makes no sense why somebody would think you do that the other way. You can flip this head around so the blade is on the inside, in which case I'd be starting the workpiece from over there instead of over here. And in an instruction guide I was looking at, they recommend that's how you do rips, because that on this side of the blade, you want to rip between the fence and the blade. That's your workpiece. And you can see the path of the wood better if you're on this side because you don't have the motor blocking it. But I'm not going to do that at all. And here's why. I should have had this ready. Hold on a second. I have a push paddle. When I do rips, when I'm going to do rips, I've done some practice ones, I'm going to use this push paddle to run the piece through. And the paddle is what's going to be going underneath that blade. My hand is not going to be going anywhere near that blade. I'm going to run the piece through, and then when it's all the way through and into the rip board, I'm going to take the rip board out. My hand doesn't get anywhere near that blade, and even if something went wrong and for some bizarre reason it got pulled in that direction, which it shouldn't, I've still got this handle giving me some added protection. So frankly, I feel completely safe ripping on this thing. And I am going to try and induce a kickback just for funsies. But I think people that say you should never rip on a radial arm saw haven't taken the time to look at how to do it safely. You can also use feather boards, which you'll use on a table saw. They make rolling wheels that only roll in one direction that you can mount off your fence here to apply pressure down and help to feed the wood through safely. There are all sorts of other attachments that also apply to a radial arm saw, to a table saw. If you look at a lot of table saw videos on YouTube, people have feather boards, they have rollers, they have all kinds of things to help feed that workpiece through and to do it safely. And I think you can do exactly the same on a radial arm saw. And again, look, this is my opinion. Take that for what it's worth. If you want one of these, if you want to use one, if you're curious, take the time, watch videos, watch instructional videos, read books, read owner's manuals, understand the tool, and I think you'll be able to use it safely. So those are my thoughts on radial arm saw safety. Again, there are some basic procedures. If you follow them for this tool, you can use it perfectly safely. And I think it applies to every tool, including table saws and compound miter saws and all that other stuff in your shop. One, make sure that the tool is in good working condition, properly aligned and adjusted. Number two, take the time to learn how to use the tool safely, understand how it can hurt you, and learn what you can do to mitigate that risk. Three, wear all of your protective equipment, eye protection, ear protection, all of that other stuff. And four, this is the most important one, stay focused. Always, always stay focused. Every YouTube woodworking accident video I've seen starts with either A, I was doing something stupid that I knew I shouldn't have been doing, or B, I was distracted. I was in a hurry, I was tired, something was distracted me, even when I was drunk. Stay focused on what you're doing. That's the biggest safety tip of all. All right, now let's get dangerous. Will there be blood? I don't know, let's find out. All right, this should go without saying, but I'm an idiot YouTuber. Don't try any of this at home. Now, I have a piece of hard maple here for a little bit of spice. It is rough cut, so it should give us a good problem if it's going to give us a problem. This is going to be really easy. I have a twine tied to the motor carriage. I'm just going to pull it gently forward into the wood after I start it up. I not only have my safety glasses on, but I'm going to wear a secondary piece of face protection. I use this when I'm wood turning. So let's see how bad this can be. And I'm going to film it. I'm going to film it in slow-mo. All right, now trying to induce a ripping kickback. I do have the saw set up properly to do a rip, which means that the blade guard is turned, so the top edge, the back edge of the blade guard is just above the edge of the workpiece right there. Because the blade is turning this way, it tends to want to lift the workpiece up a little bit, so you have the back of the blade guard holding the piece down. I also have the riving knife and the anti-kickback pawls in place and properly adjusted. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run it through until the edge of the workpiece is underneath the riving knife and kickback pawls. Then I'm going to poke at it from a distance with the stick and see if I can get it to bind against the blade. Okay, I have to say that was way more anticlimactic than I thought it was going to be. Like the crosscut climb cut was way more dramatic than the rip. I thought I was going to be able to get some kickback. I even went with a regular ripping blade with a very clearly positive rake on the teeth. And it just kind of moseyed the piece on out. I mean, I'm not saying that catastrophic kickback can't happen. Of course it can. But man, like in the first one I did, you'll see I pushed it all the way through to the pawls, and I couldn't get that to move even a little bit. Those pawls were doing a great job holding that. I hope you enjoyed this video. There's a lot of smell of burning wood in my shop right now. I'm going to go upstairs and have lunch, and I hope you enjoy this video.